Welcome to lesson 4.7, solving equations by factoring. So we have learned so far how to factor various expressions, and now we're going to use that knowledge to solve equations. So in our first example, we have that this expression over here equals 0. So let's factor this expression and see what happens. So I'm looking for numbers that multiply to negative 45, add up to negative 4, multiplying to a negative means that I have a negative and a positive. And in this case, it looks like 9 and 5. So I'll get y minus 9 times y plus 5. But now I still have equals 0. So I've factored the left side and the right side remains the same. Now, why is this useful? It's useful because of something called the zero product property. Which says that if I have two things multiplied together equaling 0, then either the first thing was 0 or the second thing was 0. So if I apply that to this situation that we're in, I have two things, y minus 9 and y plus 5, equaling 0, multiplied together. So that means that either y minus 9 equals 0 or y plus 5 equals 0. And now I've taken this one difficult equation and turned it into two much simpler equations. So here I can add 9 to both sides and I'll find that y equals 9. Here I can subtract 5 from both sides and I'll find that y equals negative 5. So I get two answers to this problem. Let's try it again. Now, in order to use the zero product property, I have to have the two things multiplied together equaling 0. So it's not actually helpful to factor this expression until it equals 0 on the other side. So my first step is going to be to subtract 40 from each side, because factoring is only useful when we have an equals 0. So let's do this subtraction. I'll get a squared plus 3a minus 40 equals 0. And now we have something that looks a lot like the example above. I'm looking for two numbers that multiply to negative 40. So one will be negative and the other will be positive, and add up to 3. So let's see what those numbers could be. We could have 10 and 4. That'll add up to 6. Well, positive 10, negative 4 will get us to 6, which is close, but not quite there. Let's see if we divide by 5 instead of 4. That's going to get us to 8. 8 minus 5 is 3. Okay. So we want a positive 8 and a negative 5 to get us to 3. And again, now that we have two things multiplied together equaling 0, either the first thing is 0 or the second thing is 0. So I will add 5 to both sides of this first one, subtract 8 from both sides of the second one. And there's my answer. Now for number 3, it is really easy to say, oh, let's divide by x on both sides. But we're not allowed to divide by 0. And any variable might be 0. So we can't divide by variables. So even though it seems like it would be really nice to divide by x on both sides to make this equation so much simpler, I really can't do that. So instead, I'm going to subtract 9x to the other side because that will get me to something that equals 0. Now I can factor, looks like I can factor out a 9x. And once I've factored out that 9x, now I have two things multiplied together equaling 0. So either 9x equals 0 or 2x minus 1 equals 0. So here I'll divide by 9 and find that x equals 0. Here I'll add 1 and then divide by 2. So I'll find that x is 0 or a half. Let's try that again. Again here, I really would like to divide by x, but I can't because it's a variable and I can't be dividing by variables. They might be 0. So instead, I will subtract x from both sides. And now I can solve by factoring. First thing, I can factor out an x from here. And now this piece here, well, 16 is a perfect square, x squared, and 1 is 1 squared. So this is a difference of squares. So I can factor that more. Using my difference of squares rule. So now that I have this fully factored, now instead of two things multiplied together equaling 0, I have three things multiplied together equaling 0, but I solve it the same way. Either x is 0 or 4x plus 1 is 0 or 4x minus 1 is 0. So let's solve each of these. So my final answer is that x could be 0, or x could be positive or negative a quarter. Let's do one last example. So here, it really doesn't look like, even if I pulled things over, that I would be able to factor this. So I'm going to actually multiply it out as my first step. And now that I've multiplied it out, I can subtract 16x from both sides, add 16 to both sides, and I'll get x squared minus 8x plus 16 equals 0. And now I have this to solve by factoring. I find that -4 and -4 will multiply up to my 16 and add up to my -8. So I'll get x minus 4 times x minus 4 equals 0. So either x minus 4 equals 0 or x minus 4 equals 0. So I'm getting two copies of the same answer. So my one answer is that x equals 4. And because I got it twice, I'm going to call it a double root. Root because I was solving something that equaled 0, so those things are called roots, and it counted twice, so I'll call it a double root. And that is everything you need to know about solving equations by factoring.